Reach Out Your Hand by MC Coy. Chapter 2. Keep My Promise. Denki let out a huff of frustration, having been scrubbing the same spot for what felt like forever, yet the scuff mark wouldn't seem to come off. He sat up with a sigh, his arms needing a break after having scrubbed all of the day prior and then throughout the evening as the ball was happening. He didn't think he could even look at another spoon without groaning in annoyance. Why did rich people always go through so many spoons? He thought to himself, also wondering how their very expensive shoes could leave such terrible scuff marks on the marble dance floor. He stood up from the corner of the dance floor, picking up his bucket and scrub brush to see just the scope of the damage. The ball had ended hours ago, and the sun was probably going to be rising soon, but Denki was told that the room needed to be spotless before the kings woke up the next day, so he had to stay after to help clean. All the tables and chairs were already put away, along with the decorations and flower arrangements. He would have probably also been done with the floor around the same time, but Sato, the head cook, begged him to stay and help finish the silverware before he left. And who was he to turn away a friend in need, especially a friend that had access to the leftover desserts from that night? Letting out a sigh of frustration, even though he didn't regret helping out, Denki started to follow the pattern of the scuff marks, trying to decide what area he should tackle next. He let out a hum as he followed the marks, feeling like he could almost see the steps that the dancer took as they made them. He followed along, turning and pausing when the scuffs told him to, spinning to find the next one and continuing the pattern until he realized he was completing the circle of the entire dance. He smiled to himself, all exhaustion leaving him as he followed the steps again, never having such clear instructions as to how a dance was supposed to go. He swung the arm, still holding the bucket dangerously, water almost spilling out as he suddenly changed directions, but he kept the momentum up, spinning, turning, and pausing several times until he felt like his feet had memorized the movements. "One of your steps is wrong." A voice coming from behind startled Denki so badly he let out a shout, turning so fast he almost lost his balance. He was ready to scold what he assumed was another servant, telling them to mind their business and leave him to clean how he pleases, but the words died in his throat as his eyes finally landed on who had spoken. The young man was around his age, and was about a head taller than him, making him have to look slightly up from how close they were standing. The man had on a simple white tunic and black pants, looking like he was about to go to bed, but Denki could tell the simple clothing items were well made and probably expensive. His face also screamed that he needed a good night's sleep with the bruises under his eyes. The person's eyes themselves were the prettiest shade of purple Denki had ever seen, and were looking at him questioningly with one of his purple eyebrows raised. It wasn't until he looked at the other's wild purple hair and saw the small band of silver resting on top of his head that realization suddenly washed over him. "Your Highness!" Kaminari squeaked out, suddenly more flustered at not only being caught dancing but being caught by the crown prince. Denki tried to take a step back and bow out of respect, but his limbs were still too shocked to listen to his commands. His legs or arms not moving, but his waist giving way in a jerky motion as he leaned forwards in a hurry. Splash! Denki blinked as he heard the noise, his eyes finally adjusting to look at the floor after almost giving himself whiplash as to how fast he bent over. He noted that a lot of water was suddenly on the ground in between them, covering his shoes and splashing up onto the prince's pant legs. Denki internally cursed, forgetting he was still holding the bucket in his hands, and immediately straightened in hopes of stopping whatever water that hadn't been spilled from getting onto the prince of the kingdom. That thought sent another wave of fear through him, his mother's warnings coming back to him as she tried to drill proper etiquette into his head whenever a noble or a member of the royal family addressed him directly. It didn't happen often. The family usually asked for things through their personal servants and then had them delegate the task to the right people. But he does see the family on occasion. The joyful and serious king would make their round every year to greet them and give them their yearly bonus in thanks for their hard work. And he had seen the young princess running around the garden or hiding from Momo in an impromptu game of hide-and-seek, but the prince was somewhat of a mystery to him. He was either out training with the guards or in the library studying. When he wasn't with his family he seemed to appreciate his time alone, and as a servant he was told to never clean where the prince was, in fear of distracting him from his important studies. meaning Denki had no idea how the other would react to such an atrocity and was now picturing the worst. "I'm sorry, Mother, I've failed you," he thought to himself as he desperately tried to save the situation. He let out a gasp as he realised both of them were still standing in the puddle and immediately grabbed the other's arm to pull him away from the mess. I, I'm so terribly sorry," he stuttered out as he dragged him to the other side of the dance floor. "You startled me, Your Highness, but I've promised to clean it up and you up. What are you doing up anyway? Do you need something? Do you need me to grab someone? Where's your personal maid? I can find Midoriya if you'd like." "None of that will be necessary," the prince stated calmly, a little too calmly for Denki's liking. The prince sounded like he was holding something back, the neutral tone only able to cover so much of what he was thinking. Denki paused at the other side of the dance floor, turning to look at the prince again to see what was bothering him, and quickly noting that he was still holding the other's arm. He let out a gasp, letting go as if the arm had burned him, and quickly went into another neck-bowing bow. "Sorry, I didn't mean to touch you without your permission, but I just wanted to get you away from the mess, which I will go clean now." With that, Denki turned to leave, hoping by escaping he could save himself from this situation and allow him to keep his job for another day. "Wait!" the prince suddenly yelled, this time reaching out and grabbing Denki before he could leave. Denki felt frozen in place, unsure of what to make of the firm grip on his arm and staying as still as possible. The prince must have noticed his discomfort and quickly released him, clearing his throat as he did. "I was just going to say that I'm sorry for startling you." "What?" Denki asked in confusion, looking up at the prince before quickly diverting his eyes, only now remembering his mother's lesson that it was rude to look the royal family in the eye. "I'm the one that startled you and caused the mess," the prince replied calmly, the same tone he used before, and making Denki sneak another peek up at him. He took note of the small tint to the other's cheek as he continued to talk, seeming embarrassed by his own actions. "I promise that wasn't my intention. I just wanted to explain the dance." Denki felt his face burn with embarrassment, remembering now that he was caught red-handed. Oh, I see. Well, I promise not to do it again while on the job. I know dancing isn't the job description, or at least not mine, so, I know I'm not good. I'll stop." "No!" the prince yelled, sounding panicky, his voice echoing slightly in the silent room. The prince cleared his throat again, realising that he had raised his voice and was trying to compose himself. "I don't want you to stop. I don't care that you dance while you work. You're quite good." He murmured that last part to himself, but Denki still heard it. He didn't really know what to say to such a compliment, especially when he wasn't sure if his ears were supposed to hear it, but luckily the prince answered for him. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interject myself in what was obviously a private moment." I don't mind," Denki said softly, his brain trying to comprehend the prince apologising to him twice now and not wanting to make him feel bad for catching him slacking off. "You are the prince after all. You must know all of the dances by heart." Shinso let out a hum before letting his face turn into a grimace. "I do, but unfortunately I don't care for it, so I feel the lessons will "You don't like dancing?" Denki gasped in shock, staring at the prince in disbelief before quickly looking away again. "Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off." If Denki had looked up, he would have seen a small uptick of the prince's mouth, but he was too busy looking at his shoes in fear. "That's quite all right," the prince said, his tone somehow lighter to show him that he wasn't mad. "I just never saw the point in it, forcing two people to go through the motions until they can leave. It always feels like a waste of time, so I avoid it when I can." But you're the prince. You go to balls and parties all the time." "Doesn't mean that I dance at them. I usually stay to the side with my sister or try to find a secluded corner to wait out." Denki just gaped at the man in front of him, uncaring if he was a prince or not. This man had the pleasure of going to party after party, and yet he refused to dance at them. He didn't understand how someone could be so lucky to live his actual dream every day but not take the opportunity. It was like a slap to the face, his eyes scanning the other over to see if he was lying. "Why would you run from such a thing?" "Why would I want to dance with those that only like me for my status or my looks?" the prince countered, and Denki hated that he had to agree with that. He never had anyone offer him a dance, and he knew if someone ever did he would say yes instantly, He never thought about how the other's intentions to dance with him could be for selfish reasons. It definitely put a damper on his fantasy of instantly connecting with the person who finally asked him to dance, but it didn't destroy it. If anything, it just made it more special. "What about the ball?" Denki said earnestly, gesturing to the space around them. "This ball was supposed to help you find your other half, and I'm correct that usually involves dancing. You must have found someone that set fire to your feet." The prince let out a huff of amusement, his eyes shining in the last rays of moonlight as he looked at Denki. "I might have, if I had danced with anyone." The prince seemed to find Denki's appalled face amusing, his smile growing a fraction as Denki took his words. "You didn't dance with anyone? No one at all?" "Nope." Denki sputtered at how the other said that with a smile, unable to form words at how confused he was. "My papa tried, like always, to get me to dance. He's desperate for me to find the one." The prince used air quotations around the words, sounding like he has heard the same speech multiple times at this point. "But I was able to persuade my papa to not force me to dance with every single person that asked." "How did you do that?" Denki asked, curious about how the prince got out of dancing at his own ball. "I went to my father and told him that I didn't want to dance with anyone that isn't worth my time. He's the more logical out of the two of them, so he agreed with me." Shinso explained to him, as if he didn't already know that the serious king was all about logic, while his partner was the emotional one out of the two. It was easy to tell which father the prince seemed to be more in tune with. "But he said I still have to please my papa and at least dance with someone, so I told him I will, and that I already had someone in mind." "You did?" Denki asked excitedly, suddenly living vicariously through the prince and picturing him already having a special someone in mind and was just waiting for the right opportunity to declare his love with a dance. "I did," the prince nodded, turning away bashfully. "I waited all night for them, but they never showed up." "No!" Denki yelled in shock, his little heart breaking at the story. He knows what it feels like to want to dance but having no one's hand to take into his own, and he didn't wish this feeling onto anyone. "It's true," the prince said with a sad chuckle. "My father thought I had pulled a logical ruse over him and is already planning another ball to appease my papa for a failed night. But I really did have someone in mind. I'm sure the person feels terrible that they missed it and will surely attend the next ball." The prince gave a hum as he contemplated his words. "They might, but now I see how unlikely that might be." "I'm sure that they will," Denki assured him, always wanting to uplift anyone feeling down. He reached for the other's hand, trying to will his optimism through the connection and into the prince's broken heart. "The next time you see them, you just have to reach out your hand and I'm positive they will instantly accept your invitation." The prince gave another contemplative hum, his eyes flickering down to their joined hands in interest. Denki realised his mistake and quickly tried to let go, an apology already halfway through his lips when the prince reached out, intertwining his hand with Denki's and holding it up and out to the side. "What are you doing?" Denki stuttered, sucking in a breath as he felt the prince's other hand rest on his lower back. "You reached out a hand. I accepted," the prince explained bluntly, his voice somehow still soft as he used his position to step closer to Denki. Denki had to crane his neck in this position to look the prince in the eyes, his mind swimming with questions while his heart started to hammer in excitement at recognising the position they were in. "Besides," the prince drawled, "I started this conversation because I wanted to correct your moves. Might as well show you instead of tell you." But I'm... you..." Denki stuttered out, his feet already itching to move as they shifted in place, but his brain was too confused to allow this to happen. "Why is the prince of our land talking to me? Why is he touching me? This has to be against some kind of rule. I also promised my father that I would dance with at least one person tonight," he mused, looking over to the window and seeing the first signs of morning coming as the moon just about vanished from the horizon, "and I don't have that much time left to keep it." He turned back to Denki, his face almost pleading as he looked down at him. "Won't you help me keep my promise?" Denki bit his lip in thought, feeling like he should say no. The prince already had a special someone in mind, and it felt wrong taking their place for the night. Or he guesses morning now, as he looks over and sees just how close to sunrise it was. He still has so much work to do, and he didn't feel right slacking off to dance. Then again, he was being asked to do something by the royal family, and he promised to serve them to the best of his abilities. Plus, who was to deny someone in need of help? "Okay," he mumbled, reaching out to place his hand on the prince's shoulder and completing the proper position. "But only one dance. I still have work to do." The prince let out a breathy laugh. "Don't worry, one dance is all I ask." With that, the prince straightened his back, shifted his feet, and began to slowly lead Denki in the dance he had just learned from looking at the scuffs on the ground. "Your form was already nearly perfect," Shinso informed him, whispering in the small space between them. "You just messed up this one move, but it's not your fault. The marks on the floor can only do so much." "Which one was it?" Denki asked, looking up from his feet when he did, but immediately dropping his gaze as he saw how intently the prince was looking at him. The prince didn't seem to like that, releasing the small of his back to use his hand and lift Denki's chin from his chest, forcing him to look up and meet his gaze. "I think it would be better off as a surprise." Denki felt his face bloom in what had to be the darkest shade of red known to man, only able to nod his head as all the words left him, and as he looked into the prince's purple eyes that seemed to hold galaxies within them. The prince gave a hum as he knew exactly the kind of effect he was having on Denki. He placed his hand securely back on Denki's lower back, pushing him closer to himself before picking up the pace and all but forcing Denki in his thoughts to focus on dancing. His heart was racing with anxiety, all of his practice alone not even coming close to the feeling of having another person guiding him. The warmth that was coming off the prince from where they were touching was almost too much for him, but he tried to stay calm and not wiggle away from it, and instead tried to hear the same music that was going through the prince's head so that their tempos matched. The last thing he wanted to do was make the man who hated dancing hate it more by choosing an inexperienced partner that stepped on his foot. He tried to enjoy it, the feeling of finally dancing with another person, but he could tell his heart wasn't in it. He was just too worried about who he was dancing with, the stakes that came with it, and the sudden realization that he had no idea he was even good enough to dance with someone like the prince. It was too much for his poor brain to take, his feet stuttering more than once when he didn't take a big enough step or tried to turn too early. To his credit, the prince didn't comment on any of it, seeming to enjoy the interaction at least a little bit as he went through the motions of turning him. It wasn't until they got to the part Denki thought that there was a pause that the prince finally spoke again, his hand falling away from his grasp and the small of his back. He thought that maybe this was the end of the dance, that the prince was tired of him after one rotation and didn't wish to continue. It hurt, but he understood. He was the replacement after all, probably not coming even close to the person he wished to dance with at the ball. He wouldn't want to dance with a bad impostor either, so he was satisfied to let go of the man and go their separate way. It seemed, though, that Denki had guessed wrong, the prince's hands finding purchase on his hips and squatting down a little, a mischievous smile in his face. "This step isn't a pause, but the reason you thought it was is because no shoes were touching the floor right here." Denki sputtered, unsure if his mouth wanted to ask him what he meant or to tell him he liked how large his hands felt holding him there. Thankfully, the latter sentence wasn't able to leave his throat, only a questioning squeak as the prince continued to look at him. "Don't worry, I got you," the prince said easily, looking a little smug at Denki's reaction. "I just need you to jump on 3, okay?" Denki nodded, still not fully understanding what was happening, but willing to do whatever the prince wanted if he kept holding him like this. "Okay," the prince drawled, holding on tighter as he started the countdown. 1, 2, 3. Denki's body went into autopilot as he jumped as soon as he heard 3. He was at some level aware as to what was going on because suddenly he was in the air, the prince having used his own leverage to push Denki higher so that he was now being held above the other's head. Instantly, Denki's hand found the prince's shoulder to help hold his weight and to also keep his balance. Though the prince didn't seem to have an issue holding him up, taking his time to rotate around and slowly deposit him back on the ground where the next scuff mark was located, indicating the start of the next move. "So, how was that?" the prince asked, still holding on to his waist as he patiently waited for Denki to get his bearings again. Denki could only blink in shock, feeling like he was a young boy again, seeing people dance for the first time and feeling the energy that seemed to hum through everyone around him. He felt like the floor was shaking, begging him to move. He heard the music in his head as if the symphony was only a few feet away from him, and he felt the warmth radiating off the prince as he clutched his shoulders a little tighter. He swore he could hear the other's heart and how it intertwined with the melody in his head. He could feel the world come to a halt as he looked up at the prince with as much hope as he could muster into his expression. "Do that again, please." The prince seemed to hesitate for just a moment, probably not expecting such a request to come from his mouth, but soon a full-blown smile etched its way onto his face, his hands instantly going back to the first position to start the dance again. "It would be my pleasure." With that, the two of them danced in harmony, feeling like they have been doing it for years as Denki followed the prince's lead without question or fear. They turned, twirled and spun with such intensity it was a surprise no one could hear their fast steps echoing in the room like a small thunderstorm. And every lift had Denki feeling like he was soaring above the clouds, letting out giggles of glee when the prince would surprise him and spin him twice before putting him down. The dance evolved from here, losing the formal pattern and instead following whatever their hearts told them to do. Denki almost cackled as he got the prince to do a spin, having to duck under his arm due to the height difference. The prince retaliated by unexpectedly dipping him and sweeping him across as if he was showing an audience his smiling face. The two continued to dance, trying new things, trying to one-up each other but still somehow always being in sync. No matter which way Denki pulled, the prince would follow. No matter how the prince changed his hand positioned on Denki's body, he would accommodate him and the new move. It was enchanting, mesmerizing, and everything Denki had ever wanted in his life. He vaguely wondered if he fell asleep scrubbing the floor again, hoping the world wasn't so cruel as to rip this dream away from him. Though he knew that this was indeed real, the world was still cruel, and decided that Denki had lived in his fantasy for a little too long and needed a reality check. The next step he took was slick with water and caused him to ruin the rhythm he and the prince had perfected and started tumbling to the ground. He saw the prince's eyes widen in shock, trying to grab him and pull him back before he fell, but that only caused the other to get caught up in his stumbling feet, tripping him along the way and taking him down with him. The prince was fast though, able to turn at the last minute so that he hit the floor first and allowed Denki to fall onto his chest instead of the hard floor. They both sat there in silence for a minute, unsure of what just happened. Suddenly the prince broke out in a roar of laughter, his head thrown back as he laughed at the situation. Denki let her giggle out as well, sitting up from where his cheek was pressed to the other's chest, already mourning the loss of the heartbeat that was singing in his ear. Are you all right?" "Never better," the prince said, with a huff of a laugh, also sitting up to look Denki over. "Are you all right? Did you hurt anything?" Denki shook his head. "No, I'm okay, just a little shaken up and confused as to how this—" As he talked, Denki looked to the side, the first rays of the sun shining through the glass windows and illuminating the room enough for him to see the forgotten bucket still sitting in the puddle he created earlier. Happened. Suddenly, dread and guilt started to swirl in Denki's stomach, making him feel like he was going to vomit. How could he have spent so long dancing with the prince? The kings will be up soon, and he wasn't even close to being finished with the floor. Not to mention he just danced with the prince. He already had someone special he wanted to dance with, and here dumb little Denki is taking his time enjoying it. He felt like a terrible person, taking someone's perfect dance out from under their noses and feeling good about it. This dance wasn't for him and never will be, yet he let himself believe that there was a spark, that for a few seconds he had found his person, and that wasn't fair to the prince at all, to literal royalty that wasn't even supposed to know he existed. "Hey, are you sure you're alright?" Denki looked up at the prince and felt his eyes water at the genuine concern he saw written clearly on his face. Yeah, I'm just— Shoot!" Denki yelled, noticing their position and how he was basically sitting in the prince's lap. He quickly stood up, trying not to make eye contact as he went to collect his mop and bucket. "I'm so sorry for tripping. It was an accident." "I know that," the prince said, also slowly standing up, trying to get him to look at him. "You aren't injured? You're sure? I can take you to ch2 if you need." "That won't be necessary. I'm fine." The prince started to look annoyed at his answers and making Denki flinch a bit in fear. He nearly escaped losing his job once today. He doesn't need to tempt fate again so soon. Excuse me while I go fetch some towels to clean up my mess. I wouldn't want anyone else to slip." With that, he quickly made his way out of the room, only stopping long enough to give the prince a quick bow before disappearing down the hall. "Wait!" the prince called after him, but Denki didn't listen, pretending he didn't hear him as he all but sprinted towards the laundry room to get some towels. He felt tears threaten to fall, and he furiously tried to blink them away, not wanting to break down when the castle was so close to waking up. He'll wait until he gets to his room, then he'll cry about how close he came to living his dream before it was rudely ripped away from under him. Thank you for listening to the end, and I hope to see you next time.